Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. As we have been a lot recently, we just got some new details on some inner workings with Call of Duty directly from a former developer, a former lead developer, Greg Reisdorf. We've been talking about Greg quite a bit over the past month or so. He's been posting a lot of really interesting information over on his Twitter, giving us insight into Call of Duty now that he's actually left the franchise. He previously was just the lead director, the creative director, I believe, at Sledgehammer Games. So he was working on the game as a lead as recently as MW3 and a whole lot before that. And he recently jumped on the Going Dark podcast from T-Dog, Smitty, and Chopper and gave us even more insight into various things with COD, including skill-based matchmaking. It's very rare you hear devs themselves, while they're active on a game, talk about it when it comes to, the topic of skill-based matchmaking as a whole. But even after people leave the company, they leave the studios, it's usually not something that ever gets detailed like this. So we've got some very interesting insights into that, alongside a few other things that were brought up as well that I do find interesting, as they're sort of hot topics and bits and pieces of info that people are always bringing up here and there in random conversations when it comes to the state of COD in general. But of course, the main focus here, skill-based matchmaking. We all know it's in COD. We all know it's been in COD for some time. We've previously had devs from Treyarch also mention it was active all the way back in Black Ops 2. It's just been more refined throughout the years, maybe, given stricter measurements over the years, so you really start to feel it. But it is something that has been in COD for a long time. There is a lot of misinformation out there about, oh, it started in this game or it started in that game. We know it's been in COD since the quote-unquote golden days, directly from previous developers. Greg does also reiterate this. He mentions that even back in Advanced Warfare, skill-based matchmaking was there, and that was one of the games that really brought the skill-based matchmaking topic into the light. The whole concept of reverse boosting, proving you could get into easier lobbies and everything. Like, that's when the community really figured out, okay, this is very clearly a thing that's going on. Greg does confirm, though, it's always been there, and it really does reinforce low skill players staying on the game. That's always been the response from developers, is skill-based matchmaking exists because it helps maintain a casual player base. And then you'll have sweatier players say, well, then why am I being punished for being good? It doesn't make me want to stay on the game, which are absolutely justified responses in my opinion. There's pros and cons to the situation from all, I think, POVs, but Greg does say basically low skill players, casual players, when they get slammed in a match, they don't come back. It's not fun at that point for them. They just hop off the game entirely. Whereas with skill-based matchmaking active, the chances of them getting slammed like that so repeatedly dwindle a ton, because they're playing players of similar skills, so they have a chance to excel to a certain extent. And that's why skill-based matchmaking has evolved so much over the course of time. It helps maintain that bottom line of players, which is a massive chunk, oftentimes that casual place being the vast majority of players on any given game, but especially Call of Duty. Then this also tied directly to some talk about casuals with bots in game. Obviously, this has risen up a lot in Warzone as of late, with casual resurgence now here. We've had casual Battle Royale for a little bit as well, but you see it in other games like Fortnite too, where they just fill the natural lobbies with bots. And what this does, from Greg's POV and the talk of the development studios, is filling bots into the games gives those bottom players a chance to feel better, where they can actually get some kills. They feel like they're having a level of success. Without skill-based matchmaking, without that bot system in play, that large chunk of players that is the bottom tier doesn't necessarily feel that level of success. And when you start to fill out lobbies a little bit more with bots, according to Greg, and you have these bottom level players feeling a little bit better about themselves as they start to see slight increases in their ability, that's where then decent players will then also end up in their matches. Obviously, they're probably not on that same level, they get taken out, and it balances things out. So it's going to give decent players or higher skill players an easier lobby here and there because of the trends with other accounts, which is an interesting correlation. You think, oh, if you're always sweating, you're always doing well, you're always going to end up in skill-based lobbies. But at a certain point, when other players are starting to do well, even if it's just small incremental increases because they're not great players, they might end up in your lobby to begin with because they're on that upward trajectory in terms of the skill-based brackets, right? Because they do well for a few games. So an interesting correlation there that he makes. Of course, Greg has no reason to lie here. I already can assume some people are going to say, well, he worked for COD, obviously he's going to make it sound good. And I think objectively you can look at it and see there are points that also he doesn't necessarily have a reason to talk talk highly about Call of Duty if he doesn't want to, because he doesn't work there anymore. There might be some NDAs in place and other things, but he seemed pretty transparent, and Greg has always seemed pretty transparent when I've talked to him in the past in various creator calls and other situations like that, right? He also brings in a really interesting point with crossplay with skill-based matchmaking. This isn't necessarily something that always is correlated one-to-one when you're talking about SBMM as a system in general, right? Obviously, when there are less players on a game, there's going to be less SBMM enforced because you're only going to be able to match with so many people. It's not going to keep you waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting to get into a game. They're still trying to get you into a match as fast as they can. So when there's less players on a game in general, skill-based is not going to be as strict. So that's why players in the past have focused in on, oh, you know, when are the least amount of players going to be on the game? Is it between 2 and 4 a.m.? Okay, if you play then, are the lobbies going to be easier than if you play from 2 to 4 p.m., you know, in that afternoon? Or if you play on the weekends versus a weekday, is it going to be easier there, right? Because of that player count. When more players are active, when more players are on the game, then skill-based matchmaking is able to work in a more strict fashion. And you may, you know, call back to that first statement of skill-based matchmaking has been in COD for a long time, dating back to, you know, BO2, Advanced Warfare, all those days, right? While yes, BO2 at one point could say on the map it had 500,000 players online, that was one console. There was no cross-play implemented at that point. So you're matching with just your people on Xbox or just your people on PlayStation. Now though, with crossplay factored in, you open up the player pool a ton. Call of Duty as a player account has been thriving immensely ever since crossplay was introduced. Maybe not as much right now as opposed to, you know, MW 2019 Cold War Warzone 1 days, right? Because of issues with the game and the player count just sort of dropping in general, but it's still bigger than it ever was on one specific platform. And so as we see crossplay introduced and that player pool open up more, that technically means you're matchmaking for a larger player pool, and thus skill-based matchmaking is able to be stricter. It's able to be more harshly enforced, and that's going to, you know, be really impactful on your experience in game. You're going to be able to see, okay, I'm always in these sweaty lobbies, right? When I have crossplay turned on, you could probably test and see, okay, if I'm playing crossplay off on PlayStation, maybe in an off time, you know, for COD, late at night, super early in the morning, a weekday, whatever the case is, right? When there's not as many people on, the lobbies are probably going to be significantly different in terms of skill levels. So while skill-based matchmaking in general, it's no secret, the concept of it and how it functions in COD is no secret, getting these additional details here directly from a dev is an interesting insight, especially when he brings up the other factors, the other elements in play here, especially crossplay, one that's not necessarily a POV that I thought of a bunch of in the past of like, oh, you know, when crossplay is going on here, yes, it's clearly going to have a large impact on skill-based. Oftentimes you're not always correlating those. To round out some of the skill-based talk before we get into some other details that I thought were interesting that Greg mentioned in the podcast, which by the way, you should go and check out the full podcast. It was like 2 hours long. We're only covering brief portions of it here, some standout things, but highly recommend you go and check it out. I'll have it linked down in the description below. To close things out on the skill-based conversation though, Greg does again reiterate that without skill-based matchmaking, and this is an opinion that we've heard a lot from various inside information from various studio developers after they've left or as they've talked about things, saying without it, chances of being slammed, being a worse player in a lobby increase for everyone. There's always going to be that bigger fish essentially without skill-based. So while the lobbies might be a little bit different overall, you as an individual player, there's always going to be someone better than you in a lobby. You won't have these situations where you're naturally, you know, just playing people of your skill level. There might be some in the lobby, but it's never going to be balanced out to that point. You're going to be hard carrying a team of not so great players versus someone who's better than all of you or some weird situation like that. That's always been the stance that they've taken with skill-based, and it seems like that does have some you know, objectivity to it if it's still being reiterated when you have no, you know, actual connection to having to reinforce that narrative, I guess, by working at Call of Duty and wanting to say, you know, it's not as bad as it seems, right? Interesting POV for sure. Outside of skill-based, Greg does also talk about a few other interesting things. There's a lot of talk about the ridiculous cosmetics in game and everything that's going on, and you know, they say they're doing surveys for, oh, do you want to see flashy skins? Should we stray away from this? Should we go back more towards realism stuff? And then they go ahead and they drop Beavis and Butthead. Like, the timing couldn't be worse. Greg mentions that stuff like skins, different design concepts like that, bundles, blueprints, that stuff is like 6 months out as far as dev time goes, and that's something that I've tried to make clear in the video videos, it doesn't always come across perfectly, or in the comments and replies and whatnot, trying to keep you guys informed with stuff. But Call of Duty's stuff like that is pre-planned so far in advance. DLC, seasons, skins, stuff like that is so far out. Greg does mention that those processing times for stuff, the creation time and the dev time for stuff like that, is going to be a lot more reactionary in the future, quicker in the future with the help of AI. So that could be something to look out for. But as far as like seeing survey results or feedback directly impact gameplay and impact decisions, a lot of that stuff won't happen for months on end, because they are in the process of making those updates, making the dev changes based on the feedback, but it can't get implemented for 4, 5, 6 months down the road. This was a bit of an interesting thing as far as Call of Duty Battle Royale goes. He did mention that back when H1Z1 was thriving, Call of Duty was kind of tinkering with the idea of a Battle Royale during Advanced Warfare. They never really went in on it because they thought it was something so different, so out there it probably wasn't possible. But before Fortnite was a main thing and Call of Duty reacted with Blackout and everything, they were contemplating getting into that Battle Royale space primarily because of H1Z1, which is kind of interesting there. They also talked a little bit about the difference, because this has been a hot topic lately too, with seasonal updates in COD always being so hit or miss. Some break the game, some save it, and then the next one breaks it again, and it's this never-ending cycle. You didn't have these situations back when there was just DLC, where Black Ops 2 came out and there were 4 DLC packs throughout the year. Greg mentions that there was actually pretty distinct differences in the DLC versus live ops eras that we're in now. With DLC, those were the only chances you had to fix the game. So you had 3 or 4 chances a year to adjust things, to fix things with the title updates associated with those DLC packs. Whereas now with current seasons, it's still rough and it's hard to implement things, and have it go seamlessly. He mentioned it basically is a situation where you have the ability to consistently change things on the fly and react to things much quicker, which ultimately should help address problems, but also because of how often it's happening, can always introduce situations for conflict as well. With MW3 in specific, which we know post-launch there had some insanely good support, insanely consistent support, he said that was only possible because it was basically a hustle project. They were constantly monitoring everything on social media, Twitter, Reddit, whatever the case is, and sending someone to fix these things as soon as they sprung up. And they were really dedicated to always being on top of what was being said. Hey, this is broken, this is buggy, can we fix this? Which I guess isn't always the mindset of, we got to fix it here and now ASAP. It's more so of, okay, we are aware of that, we're working on it. So you can definitely see the difference in MW3 and the approach that it had with Sledgehammer versus, what's happened in other Call of Duties before it and even after it now with Black Ops 6. Then the last thing I wanted to bring up here is actually in regards to the 2-year sort of sequel cycle for COD. So we saw this with MW2 going in MW3. We're about to see it with BO6 going into Black Ops 7. They mentioned that on the podcast, they were asking Greg, how is it that MW2 was so disastrous? It seemed like Infinity Ward was just ignoring our feedback the entire year, but then Sledgehammer was able to listen to stuff, change things so quickly, and get the game back on the tracks, right? And basically, Greg said the ability to see people react to MW2 in real time as they were developing the sequel in MW3 benefited them greatly. It allowed them to have these direct feedback, these direct responses that they could then alter stuff in game to be ready for MW3 launch and flip things entirely and make it so that the movement wasn't as bad, the gunplay wasn't as bad, the complexity of the gunsmith wasn't like it was in MW2. Because they saw the very loud feedback online and with numbers, they were able to directly respond to that. Hopefully that's a similar cycle going into Black Ops 7. They're seeing the loud feedback online about Black Ops 6 and what's not working now, how it's been so problematic with the updates, certain gameplay features just not hitting with the community. Hopefully Treyarch's able to apply that same thing of, okay, we see the live feedback now, while we might not have the time or ability to change it entirely for Black Ops 6, it's something we can have set aside and ready for Black Ops 7 launch. So that does give me a bit of hope there, considering they were so aware of that feedback during their dev time on the follow-up sequel there. But yeah, some pretty interesting insights from Greg yet again. This has almost turned into a weekly series detailing what Greg Reisdorf has talked about and given us as far as insight into Call of Duty development has been. Obviously, if he continues to give us, information on some of the hotter topics, more controversial topics in the COD scene, I'll be sure to keep you guys up to date. So if you want to be in the know for that alongside everything else going on in COD, be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on those post notifications. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like on it. It's always really appreciated. And as mentioned, go and check out the Going Dark podcast. I'll have that linked down below if you want to watch the entire episode in full. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.